Darkness on Cascade Highway 9 is not a gentle thing. On a night like this, when a late autumn storm tears down from the peaks, the rain pounds against the asphalt with a blind, heavy fury, turning the mountain road into a slick ribbon of isolation. My name is Eleanor Vance, 73 years old. For 4 decades, I taught high school literature in a quiet timber town in Oregon, and for the last 15 years, my hands have known the steady, comforting weight of wet clay spinning on a potter's wheel. Or at least they did until 4 weeks ago, when a surgeon replaced my right hip with a titanium joint. At 73, your bones do not mend with the sweet speed of youth. They ache, they stiffen. Yet here I was, out in the middle of that howling storm, sitting in the cramped back seat of a luxury SUV that smelled faintly of expensive cologne and desperate panic. The vehicle lurched to a sudden, violent halt. The hazard lights blinked a frantic rhythm against the wall of dark pines. Inside, the only sound was the furious drumming of rain and the heavy breathing of my son, Marcus, sitting in the driver's seat. Marcus is 45. To the outside world, he wore the sharp suit of a successful real estate broker in Portland. But beneath the tailoring, Marcus was drowning in a rising tide of bad investments and unpaid gambling debts. He had spent the last 2 years looking at me not as a mother, but as a locked vault he couldn't pick. The front door of the SUV creaked open. A gust of freezing mountain wind rushed into the cabin. Footsteps crunched heavily on the gravel shoulder. A second later, my door was wrenched open with a savage jerk. The rain slammed into my face. A pair of large hands that had once held mine when he was a small, sweet-smelling boy learning to ride a bicycle, hooked brutally under my arms. Before I could protest, before my newly mended hip could scream a warning, I was yanked forward. My feet hit the slick mud of the road shoulder, and my right leg buckled instantly. "Marcus, stop! My hip!" I gasped, swallowed by the roar of the gale. He didn't listen. He dragged my 73-year-old body completely out of the car, propping my weight unceremoniously against the cold, wet side panel. My hip burned with a white-hot agony. Then, Marcus reached back into the dim interior. His hands closed around my aluminum walker, the simple silver frame that had been my only bridge to independence for the last month. He lifted it high, turned toward the steep drop-off of the mountain shoulder, and hurled it down into the ravine. I heard it crash against the jagged rocks below before the swollen creek swallowed it into the blackness. Marcus stepped back, the rain plastering his hair. He leaned in close, his face twisted into an ugly snarl. "Get out and walk, old woman," Marcus shouted over the thunder, his voice venomous. "You're done draining us. Figure it out yourself." I stood there, trembling, paralyzed by disbelief. But the true blade of that night came from the passenger seat. A soft, mocking sound cut through the storm. I turned my head slowly. In the dim glow of the dashboard, my daughter-in-law, Chloe, was leaning across the center console. Chloe, 39, wrapped in an expensive cashmere sweater, was looking at me with a bright, genuine smile. She wasn't panicked. She was laughing, the chuckle of someone watching a street performer. She leaned closer to the open window, her eyes bright with unmasked contempt. "Bye, Eleanor. Go meet a grizzly bear in the woods. Honestly, you've been an embarrassing, miserable drain on our family. Good riddance." The heavy door slammed shut with a sickening thud. The automatic locks clicked down, the brake lights flared red, and the tires spun hard against the gravel, spitting mud. The vehicle surged forward, and the red taillights vanished around a sharp bend, leaving me entirely alone in the wilderness. The silence that rushed in behind them was heavier than the storm. I sank slowly into the mud. At that moment, the physical pain in my hip was nothing compared to the chilling void inside my chest. A mother gives her youth and strength to build a life for her children, and when the house is paid for, they throw you into the mud to die so they can collect the keys. I sat there in the dark for a long minute. They thought they had won. They thought they had erased their broken old mother on a lonely mountain road. They had no idea. As I dragged myself up from the mud, a cold clarity settled over my mind. Let them drive away laughing. Let them stop at some warm diner down in the valley to celebrate. When they finally turned that SUV back into my driveway a few hours from now, expecting an empty, dark house, they were going to find something entirely different. They were going to find me sitting right in my living room waiting for them, with a surprise that would dismantle their entire world. You do not survive 73 years without learning how a life is built, and more importantly, how it is unraveled. Sitting here tonight, the damp chill of that mountain road still lingering in my bones, my mind drifts back to the foundation of it all. 5 years ago, my husband, Arthur, collapsed by our greenhouse, his heart giving out after decades of quiet labor. In the silence that followed, I stayed in our modest home, filling my bays with the steady spin of the potter's wheel and setting aside every spare dollar for a self-sufficient autumn of life. My son Marcus grew up differently. While Arthur and I taught him the value of calloused hands, Marcus looked at the world through a lens of surface glitter. He measured a man's worth by his car and his zip code. By 35, he had married Chloe, a woman who sniffed out cheap fabric from across a room and treated anyone living outside the affluent hills like background noise. They lived far above their means, swimming in high-interest debt and social pretense. I learned the true cost of their lifestyle 5 years ago, right after Arthur died. Marcus walked into my kitchen smelling of scotch and quiet panic, his business on the brink of total collapse. He needed $50,000 or bankruptcy would strip him bare. I remember looking into his terrified eyes and seeing not a grown man, but the little boy who used to skin his knees on our back porch. So I did what a mother does. I liquidated my emergency certificate of deposit, handing over every last cent of my safety net to keep him afloat. Around that same time, another young man crossed my path. His name was Sam. He was 17 then, a quiet senior in my literature class whose father had left him sleeping in a rusted truck. When I found out, I didn't hesitate. I gave him the small spare room above my garage for 6 months, stocked my pantry, and paid for his college application fees out of pocket. On the day he packed to leave, Sam stood on my porch, his eyes shining with quiet gratitude. "Mrs. Vance, I can never repay this," Sam had said, his voice thick. "If you ever need me, anytime, anywhere, just call." I smiled then, patted his shoulder, and told him to just go out and be a good man. I never expected that a promise made by a starving teenager would one day mean life or death on a freezing mountain ledge, while my own blood watched me freeze. The tragedy of parents like us is that we're blinded by our own devotion. We mistake the quiet calculation of desperate adults for filial piety. About 6 months ago, after my husband's headstone was finally set, Marcus and Chloe came to Sunday dinner with a proposal wrapped in honey. With my health slowing down, they suggested I hand over the daily burdens of home ownership. They would take care of me, moving into my paid-off house and ensuring I was looked after in my golden years. At first, it sounded like a relief, but beneath their smooth promises, the machinery of the trap began to turn. Within weeks, the atmosphere shifted. The spare room was refurnished with cheap, modern furniture. Chloe began tossing out Arthur's old wooden bookcases, and Marcus, with a tight, nervous smile, started sliding papers across the kitchen table late at night. deed transfer forms and power of attorney templates disguised as administrative convenience. "Just sign here, Mom, so we can manage the utilities if you're ever in the hospital," Marcus would say, his pen poised too eagerly over the signature line. I hesitated. My gut screamed that every stroke of that pen was signing away my roof, but my heart made excuses. He was my son. I kept telling myself desperation made people clumsy, not monstrous. So I compromised, keeping the titles safely locked in my safe while letting them believe compliance was near. That illusion shattered completely 4 weeks ago, the day my hip gave out and I underwent major surgery. The moment I came home, walking with the agonizing support of an aluminum frame, the mask dropped. I was no longer a mother to be cared for. I was an expensive, immobile obstacle blocking their escape from mounting gambling debts. Last Tuesday evening, as I sat in the living room trying to read, I overheard them talking in the hallway, thinking I was asleep. "We can't keep waiting for her to kick the bucket naturally," Chloe's voice hissed, cold and sharp. "The creditors are calling every day. If we put her in that state-funded Valley facility, the cheap one off Route 9, nobody visits and we list this house by next month." Marcus sighed, heavy with selfish relief. "You're right. We'll tell her it's a rehabilitation center. Once she's checked in under our custody, we clear out her safe." They had already picked out my retirement home, a dismal, underfunded facility smelling of antiseptic, tucked deep in the backwoods. They had traded my life, my 40 years in this town, and every sacrifice I had ever made for them, for the equity in a piece of real estate. When Marcus walked into my room that night and told me we were driving down to a specialized clinic for an evaluation, I didn't fight him. I didn't scream. I simply put on my coat, grabbed my walker, and let them lead me out to the car. I wanted to see how far a son could fall. I wanted to witness the exact moment a human being traded his soul for a set of house keys. And, as it turned out, I got my answer on the freezing rain on Highway 9. The taillights of Marcus's SUV vanished into the blackness, and the forest swallowed up the sound of the engine, leaving behind only the relentless roar of the mountain storm. I was entirely alone on the shoulder of Highway 9. The asphalt was freezing, slick with oil and rain that soaked instantly through my wool coat. At 73, with fresh surgical stitches holding my right hip together, every instinct screamed at me to curl into a ball and wait. Hypothermia in an autumn downpour at 2,000 feet elevation does not knock softly. It creeps into your fingers, numbs your chest, and puts you to sleep forever within hours. I could not lie there. Pain is a strange companion when survival is on the line. As I tried to move, a white-hot spike flared deep inside my right joint, threatening to tear the titanium fixture right out of the bone. With my aluminum walker lying smashed and useless at the bottom of the ravine, I had to use what remained of my body, my bare hands. I dropped flat into the freezing mud of the road edge. I gripped the coarse gravel and wet grass, digging my fingers in deep, and began to drag my body forward. Inch by agonizing inch, I pulled myself along the black asphalt. The rain beat down on my back like lead shot, and the wind howled through the canyon. My knees scraped raw against the grit, but I did not stop. A mother who has spent decades carrying the invisible weight of a family does not break easily, even when her own flesh and blood throws her to the wolves. I dragged myself past the first marker post, then the second, fighting for every single breath in the thin mountain air. Then, through the heavy curtain of rain, something shifted in the darkness. A sharp, piercing glare cut through the night ahead. Twin beams of white light sliced across the wet pine trees, sweeping down the winding grade. It was not the fast acceleration of a luxury SUV trying to run from a crime, but the heavy, low-pitched rumble of a four-wheel drive utility vehicle moving with steady, deliberate purpose. A heavy-duty Ford pickup truck, its amber hazard lights flashing on the roof and a yellow warning strobe revolving on the rack, slowed down as it rounded the curve. Heavy snow chains clanked rhythmically against the wheel wells. The truck pulled onto the shoulder, blocking the lane behind me to shield my frail body from the blind curves. The engine idled with a deep, reassuring thrum. The driver's door swung open, and a man jumped down into the mud. He wore a high-visibility orange rain jacket and carried a waterproof flashlight. He did not hesitate or stand around shouting into the wind. He moved with the trained, absolute efficiency of someone who worked the treacherous mountain passes for a living. He rushed over, dropping instantly to his knees beside me in the mud, and clicked on his flashlight. The bright beam illuminated my face, wet, pale, and shivering violently. The man froze. He stared down at me, his eyes widening in the harsh white light as sudden, profound recognition flashed across his weathered features. "Mrs. Vance," he breathed, his voice cutting clean and clear through the storm. It was Sam, not a random stranger plucked from a fairy tale, but the same quiet 17-year-old student I'd pulled out of a rusted pickup truck a lifetime ago, now a rugged 32-year-old highway construction and civil engineering supervisor for the county district. Sam did not waste a single second with emotional speeches or tearful exclamations. The emergency training in his veins took over instantly. "Don't move, Mrs. Vance. I've got you," Sam said, his tone entirely level, calm, and professional. Before I could say another word, he stripped off his heavy, dry, fleece-lined work jacket and wrapped it tightly around my shivering shoulders, cutting off the bite of the mountain wind. With strong, careful arms, accustomed to heavy labor, he slid one arm beneath my back and the other under my knees, lifting my frame with practiced ease so as not to jar my freshly operated hip. He carried me straight to the passenger side of his warm, diesel-heated truck, hoisting me inside and settling me onto the dry upholstery. Instantly, the heating system's cabin blasted a wave of restorative warmth over my skin. Sam slammed the passenger door shut, ran around to the driver's side, and climbed inside. Before putting the truck in gear, he reached up to the dashboard console, pressing a button to ensure the wide-angle commercial dash cam mounted to the windshield was locked down, recording everything: the heavy rain, the exact GPS coordinates, the empty stretch of highway where my walker lay hidden in the ravine, and my face, bruised from the cold. He reached for his satellite radio-linked mobile phone, dialing directly into the county emergency dispatch network with absolute clinical precision. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 out on Route 9, mile marker 12. I need an expedited medical evaluation team dispatched immediately. I've got an elderly female patient here, severe exposure, potential hypothermia, and a recent surgical hip replacement compromised by forced abandonment. I am securing the scene now. Timestamp and dashcam footage are logging automatically." He clicked the radio off, turned to me, and placed a warm, steady hand gently over my trembling fingers. "You're safe now, Mrs. Vance," Sam said, softly, looking me straight in the eye with deep loyalty. "Nobody is touching you tonight." As the truck turned smoothly around and began heading down the mountain towards safety, I leaned back against the warm headrest. The storm outside was still raging, but the cold fear inside my chest was gone. My son thought he had buried me in the dark. Instead, he ran straight into the exact wall of karma I had built. Sam did not take me to a sterile, distant hospital where administrative red tape and quiet corridors could bury what had happened. He drove me straight back to my own home, pulling the heavy-duty truck right into the driveway and cutting the engine as the rain drummed softly against the roof. The house stood dark and silent, untouched by the betrayal waiting outside its walls. At 73, after a night that nearly cost me my life on the mountain asphalt, most people would have collapsed into bed with tears and panic. But survival strips away the luxury of weakness. A lifetime of walking through storms teaches a woman that grief is a luxury best saved for later. Action is the only shield that matters when your own blood turns executioner. In the quiet warmth of my living room, with Sam standing watch by the front window, I moved with a cold, absolute clarity that left no room for hesitation. My first call was not to my son, and it certainly wasn't to ask for explanations or mercy. It was to Arthur Vance, the family's senior legal counsel, and a man who had watched my children grow from infancy. "Arthur, it's Eleanor," I said, my voice steady, sharp, and entirely devoid of the trembling frailty Marcus had expected to find in the ravine. "The family trust. I want every single asset locked down permanently, effective immediately. No modifications, no transfers, no secondary access of any kind." For decades, people had whispered behind my back, mocking what they called my stubborn paranoia. Marcus had spent years nagging me to sign over the deed to the estate, whining that keeping the property locked inside a strict legal family trust was an insult to his status as the heir. He never knew, and neither did Chloe, that my foresight was the only thing standing between me and total desolation. The house, the land, the investments, they were all legally untouchable, bound tight by ironclad clauses that required my physical, notarized signature in the presence of an independent officer of the court. Without my direct hand, Marcus owned nothing more than the expensive paint on his stolen SUV. My second move struck deeper than civil law, hitting the very foundation of his criminal arrogance. Sam did not leave after dropping me off. He stayed right there in the hallway, pulling a high-resolution data card straight out of the commercial dashcam mounted to his truck's windshield. With the calm, methodical precision of a trained civil engineer, he transferred the digital files onto a secure laptop and transmitted them directly to the State Police Department's Special Investigations Division, flagging the file under elder abuse and malicious abandonment. The digital footage left zero room for doubt, debate, or clever legal spin. The high-definition lens captured every brutal second. The headlights of Marcus's luxury vehicle cutting through the mountain mist, the precise license plate number gleaming under the backlights, the sound of my aluminum walker being hurled contemptuously into the dark ravine, and the cold, mocking laughter of Chloe echoing through the open window before they sped away into the storm. There was no sympathy left in my chest, only the heavy, quiet gravity of a reckoning long overdue. Sam walked back into the living room, sliding the laptop closed with a soft click. He looked at me with a gaze that carried the absolute loyalty of someone who had never forgotten a lifeline thrown to him in his darkest hour. "The state police have the entire package, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice entirely level and resolute. "They're moving jurisdiction to the county prosecutor's desk right now. Nobody gets away with throwing a human life into a freezing ditch." "Thank you, Sam," I answered softly, looking into the eyes of a stranger's son who had turned out to be more family than my own flesh. "Wait outside in the kitchen. The night is about to get very loud." I did not hide in the shadows, nor did I run upstairs to change out of my damp clothes.
Instead, I walked slowly over to the closet, pulled out my favorite cream-colored wool cardigan, and buttoned it up to the collar. I brewed a single cup of Earl tea, letting the steam rise slowly in the dim light of the fireplace. I settled back into my old armchair facing the front windows. Outside the glass, the rain began to taper off into a heavy drizzle, wrapping the front yard in a thick, eerie silence. I sat in the quiet dark, waiting for the crunch of gravel in the driveway, waiting for the familiar twin beams of headlights to sweep across the living room wall, and waiting for my ungrateful son to walk right back into the trap he had so carefully dug for me. As I held the warm porcelain cup between my palms, listening to the grandfather clock tick away the seconds in the corner of the room, a strange sense of peace settled over my bones. The storm outside was dying down, but the storm I had unleashed inside the legal system was just beginning to gather force. Marcus thought he had buried his past liabilities in the cold mud of Route 9, forgetting a fundamental truth of the world. You can abandon an old woman to the elements, but you can never outrun the weight of your own actions when the bill finally comes due.
For 2 long hours, Marcus and Chloe celebrated their triumphant escape at a high-end downtown restaurant, clinking champagne glasses over crystal tables and laughing away any remaining shadow of guilt or remorse. In their minds, the burdensome obstacle of my existence had been successfully discarded in the cold mud of the mountain forest, leaving the path wide open for them to inherit the sprawling family estate by sunrise. They drove back under the midnight sky with the lazy, bloated confidence of predators who believed the hunt was already over and the prize was safely locked away. When their luxury SUV finally turned into our private driveway, cutting through the shadows of the old oak trees, something felt entirely wrong. The front porch light was blazing. Every single window on the ground floor radiated a warm, steady glow through the glass, cutting sharply through the dark autumn night. Marcus killed the engine and stepped out into the crisp night air, walking briskly toward the front door with his keys already in hand, eager to survey his new kingdom. He pushed the heavy oak panel open and strode confidently into the foyer, ready to claim his prize. He stopped dead in his tracks. The color drained completely from his face, and the blood seemed to turn to ice in his veins. There I sat, alive, warm, and composed, rocking gently in the old wooden rocking chair right beside the living room fireplace. Chloe followed closely behind him, stepping across the threshold with a self-satisfied smirk still lingering on her lips. But the moment her eyes locked onto mine, the smile vanished instantly. She let out a sharp, breathless gasp, her fingers went limp, and her expensive designer handbag crashed heavily against the polished hardwood floor. Her face turned chalk white, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror as she stared at me, convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was looking at a ghost returned from the grave. Marcus stumbled backward a step, his hands flying to his head as his carefully constructed mask of cold cruelty shattered into a million pieces. The panic hit him hard, but his instinct for self-preservation kicked in even faster. With a sickening display of emotional gymnastics, he threw his hands up, dropped straight onto his knees on the rug, and squeezed his eyes shut to force out a flood of fake, theatrical tears. "Mom, oh, thank God!" Marcus wailed, his voice cracking with a disgusting, rehearsed desperation. "We turned around. We spent hours driving back up that mountain, looking everywhere for you. We were so terrified something happened to you." I did not raise my voice. I did not scream, throw things, or let loose the fiery rage that had been burning inside my chest all night. I simply sat there, holding my porcelain teacup, and looked down at my own flesh and blood groveling on the carpet like a trapped rat.
I leaned forward slightly, looking him dead in the eye, and repeated back his exact words from the freezing storm, spoken with a quiet, biting chill. "We're not running a charity home for broken-down antiques, Chloe. It's time for her to check out permanently." Marcus choked on his own breath, his fake crying instantly dying in his throat as the chilling reality hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't looking at a ghost, he was looking at the executioner of his future. Before he could stammer out another pathetic lie, the quiet night outside was violently shattered. Sharp, synchronized red and blue flashes painted the living room walls in a harsh, warning strobe. A heavy towny police cruiser pulled right up on the gravel, its engine cutting off, followed instantly by the heavy slam of car doors and the firm, methodical crunch of boots marching across the yard. The front door swung wider as state investigators and county deputies stepped directly into the hall, their badges catching the light. Marcus scrambled up from the floor, his face twisting in blind panic as he pointed wildly at me. "Wait, you don't understand, officers. This is a family matter. She's old, she's confused." "Mr. Marcus Vance?" A sharp, authoritative voice cut through his frantic excuses. A senior investigator stepped forward, holding a digital tablet displaying time-stamped footage. "You're being placed under arrest for felony elder abuse, malicious abandonment, and reckless endangerment in the second degree. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Chloe let out a muffled shriek, stumbling back against the wall as the cold steel handcuffs clicked firmly around Marcus's wrists. I took one slow, deliberate sip of my tea, watching the lights reflect off the metal cuffs. My son had planned to bury me in the dark mountains, leaving me to freeze alone in the wilderness. Instead, he had walked straight into a trap built out of his own greed, sealing his fate under the harsh glare of justice. As the heavy wooden front door closed behind the deputies, leading my handcuffed son away into the night, the silence of the house finally returned. The storm outside had completely passed, leaving behind a profound, unyielding peace. Marcus had spent his entire life trying to strip away everything I built, believing that cruelty and deceit were shortcuts to power. He never understood that true strength is forged in endurance, and that the seeds of karma always find fertile ground. I set my empty teacup down on the wooden table, knowing the reckoning was complete. The harsh red and blue strobe lights from the county cruisers continued to wash over the living room walls long after the heavy oak front door clicked shut. Marcus was gone, led away into the dark in a pair of cold steel handcuffs based on the undeniable digital evidence from Sam's wide-angle dash cam footage. The charges were official, severe, and entirely inescapable. Felony elder abuse, malicious abandonment, and reckless endangerment of a vulnerable adult under state law. The illusion of invincibility he had lived under for years shattered instantly, leaving him completely paralyzed by the realization of his ruined future, his vanished inheritance, and his total loss of freedom. Chloe was not taken away in cuffs that night, but her personal nightmare was only just beginning to unfold. As the state investigators prepared to leave the property, a senior officer stepped forward and handed her an official emergency restraining order signed by a county judge, barring her from coming within 500 yards of my property or attempting any form of electronic or direct communication. Looking at her panicked, tear-streaked face in the dim hallway light, I felt no anger left, only a profound, hollow indifference.
By morning, legal notice would be served regarding Marcus's immediate filing for divorce, as the man she married solely for social status and luxury abruptly realized she was a massive financial liability he could no longer afford to carry into a grueling courtroom battle. The true financial reckoning, however, arrived precisely at 9 o'clock the next morning, sweeping away every last trace of their elaborate deception. Arthur Vance, our family's senior legal counsel, walked through the front door carrying a heavy leather briefcase filled with certified paperwork. He didn't need to ask what had happened during the night. The local police reports and dashcam files were already circulating rapidly through the county legal networks, detailing every single aspect of the arrest and the concrete legal evidence. "Everything is locked down tight, Eleanor," Arthur said, placing a thick stack of certified documents onto the mahogany dining table with a reassuring thud. "The family trust has been legally fortified beyond any possibility of breach. Not a single cent, property deed, or investment portfolio can be touched without your explicit notarized signature in front of the court. As for Marcus," he paused, adjusting his glasses with a grim expression. "Between his exorbitant criminal defense retainers, the civil suits, and the immediate freezing of his joint accounts, he is legally and financially wiped out before his arraignment even begins." It didn't take long for the cold reality of absolute bankruptcy to consume whatever hollow lifestyle they had built on deceit. Within 48 hours, the financial fallout hit like a tidal wave across their fragile world. The luxury SUV parked in our driveway was repossessed by the bank before noon. The high-end downtown apartment they rented was slapped with emergency eviction notices as their credit cards maxed out under mounting legal fees, high-interest loans, and emergency bail bonds. Marcus had spent months scheming, plotting, and ultimately pushing a frail old woman into a freezing mountain ditch just to accelerate his inheritance. In his blind greed, he completely miscalculated the foundation of my life. He assumed age equaled weakness, and that silence meant surrender. Instead, his impatience handed him the exact opposite of what he wanted: a felony record, a dismantled marriage, a mountain of suffocating debt, and a prison cell awaiting his trial. Furthermore, the legal fallout extended far beyond criminal court and initial police reports. Every single asset Marcus hoped to plunder was completely out of reach, protected by the ironclad walls of the trust. The debts he accumulated while trying to maintain his fake status began to swallow him whole. Creditors circled like vultures, and his former high society associates distanced themselves the moment his mugshot hit the evening news headlines. He stood completely alone, stripped of his status, his wealth, and his freedom, staring down the consequences of his own calculated malice, realizing too late that true power cannot be stolen through cruelty. As the morning sun climbed higher into the sky, casting a warm light over the front lawn, I walked over to the tall bay window. I looked out over the quiet autumn yard where the rain had finally cleared away entirely. The estate stood tall, solid, and entirely untouched, protected by the very boundaries my critics used to mock as stubborn paranoia. Some people believe that forgiveness is a duty owed to your own blood, no matter how deep the betrayal goes. They tell you that family is family, and that you should sweep the ugliness under the rug for the sake of peace. But true peace isn't bought by enabling cruelty or shielding criminals from the consequences of their actions. Justice isn't about revenge, it is simply about letting the world return to its proper order, where those who dig a grave for others inevitably fall into it themselves. I took one final look at the empty driveway, turned away from the glass, and walked back to my quiet, peaceful home, knowing the storm
had finally passed for good.
Months have a quiet, steady way of smoothing the jagged edges of a storm, turning yesterday's terror into a distant, faded memory. By the time autumn rolled back around, painting the valley in rich shades of amber and gold, the frantic chaos of Marcus's trial, his conviction, and his absolute financial ruin had settled into a profound, unshakable stillness. The estate stood as tall and serene as ever, completely untouched by the greed and malice that once tried to tear it apart from the inside out. It was mid-morning when the crunch of gravel at the very foot of the long driveway caught my attention. I looked up from the wooden workbench on the wide front porch, where my hands were gently shaping a fresh mound of gray clay, and saw a familiar figure standing just beyond the property line. It was Chloe. She looked a lifetime away from the woman who once strode through my halls with an air of untouchable entitlement and absolute arrogance. The expensive designer bags and sharp sneers were entirely gone, replaced by worn-out shoes, a faded coat, and a face completely hollowed out by months of desperation, isolation, and survival. She had walked the entire 500 yards from the boundary sign, stopping right where the emergency restraining order legally forced her to halt. When she saw me looking, she dropped to her knees right there on the cold gravel, her shoulders shaking with heavy, unrestrained sobs as she begged for a single word of mercy, claiming she had been manipulated, that she had nowhere left to turn now, that every door in the city was locked against her. I didn't rush toward the gate in triumph, nor did I raise my voice in bitter anger. I simply set the damp piece of clay down on the wooden board, wiped my hands slowly on a clean linen cloth, and walked down the porch steps until I stood a few paces away from her, separated only by the legal boundary. The air between us was entirely still. "I forgive you, Chloe," I said, my voice steady, carrying softly across the quiet yard without a single ounce of malice. Because if I kept holding on to that hatred, I would only be poisoning the remaining days of my own life. But forgiveness does not mean enabling cruelty, and it certainly does not mean opening the door back up. The door to my life and my home is closed to you and Marcus permanently. Find your own way forward and never come back here again. She opened her mouth, perhaps to argue, manipulate, or plead once more, but the absolute finality in my eyes silenced her instantly. She turned around and walked away, a broken silhouette fading into the distance. The heavy, suffocating weight that had lingered in my chest for so long finally evaporated, leaving behind a lightness I hadn't felt in years. A few moments later, the front gate clicked open, and Sam walked up the pathway carrying a fresh batch of raw clay from the local quarry, his familiar, steady smile cutting through the cool morning air. We didn't need to talk about what had just happened out on the road. We simply returned to the quiet rhythm of the porch, our hands working the clay together under the gentle warmth of the midday sun. People often spend their entire lives worrying about how they are valued by the generation coming up behind them. My own flesh and blood had reduced my entire existence to a mere zero the moment they thought I was old, frail, and financially drained. But sitting there, listening to the soft turning of the potter's wheel and looking out over the flourishing garden I had built with my own 2 hands, I finally understood the deeper truth of it all. A person's true worth is never measured by the approval, the mercy, or the cruel calculations of ungrateful people. It lives entirely in the seeds of kindness, resilience, and quiet dignity that you scatter across the world throughout your years. When the real storms finally break over your head, those very seeds grow tall, wrapping their arms around you to keep you safe when you need it most.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in? And what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.